everybody. Welcome to our H-1B co-founder webinar today. We're going to be talking about new USCIS guidance on the employer-employee relationship, as well as the H-1B lotteries, so that you can start off the new year and your startup on a solid foundation. My name is Sophie Alcorn. I'm the founder of Alcorn Immigration Law, host of the Sophie Alcorn podcast, which is going to get relaunched in a few weeks, which is super exciting. I write for TechCrunch. And I believe the world should be a place where you and everybody should be able to follow their dreams and build in a flow state something that helps everybody else in the world make the world a better place. So excited to offer these new legal possibilities to help reduce the friction to innovation, to create a world of abundance. And to my wonderful, brilliant attorney colleague, Linda Haggerty, welcome. It's great to have you here today. Everybody, Linda is such an amazing lawyer, and she's in charge of overseeing all of our legal client work at Alcorn. Has built an incredible team of attorneys and paralegals. So welcome, Linda. Great to be here with you today.
Thank you, Sophie. I'm happy to be here and dive into these exciting new regulations.
Yeah, it's really exciting. There's
It
been a
really-
lot of legal changes in the news this fall, actually.
There
Feels
have
like
been,
a
yeah, and all positive for the most part. So that's even more
yeah. Yeah, this administration is doing what they can now, so that's very exciting. This is our team. We have a wonderful team of attorneys and paralegals. I'm thrilled because everybody we've been able to hire lately has, like decades of experience. So we're really upping the caliber, continuously improving the caliber of the services that we're able to offer our clients, which I'm really, really proud of. Okay, so let's dive in. You heard this from Alex. The way this works is you can ask questions anonymously in the Q&A panel, but you have to check if your name is set to have your name or to be anonymous. So if it has your name, people will know who's asking what. So please be cautious about that. I already see we got our first question, so yay, points for you. Very exciting. Typically in these webinars, we get like 35 to 50 questions, and we usually run out of time to answer all of them. So the sooner you can ask your question, the more likely you are to get an answer, but also we're available for consultations and individual case evaluations and H-1Bs for you in the lottery or transfers. So, we can do all of that. And if you want to have a confidential conversation, we're absolutely happy to do that. Linda and I and our two colleagues, Corey and Lana, are all attorneys, and we meet with clients and potential new clients daily to answer questions confidentially and to provide legal advice and education in a one-on-one setting. So that is an alternative as well. We have a lot to cover. We're going to do some H-1B basics. We're going to do co-founders and startup H-1B early stage considerations, recent legal changes. We're also going to talk a little bit about the lottery, which we're kicking off our lottery season right now, essentially, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're very focused on starting early and getting ready for March.
Yeah, great. And everybody's going to get a copy of all of this. And yeah, let's just dive into it.
Okay.
So, all right, Linda, what's an H-1B?
So, an H-1B is a professional work visa, a temporary work visa, and it's for those in specialty occupations, meaning positions that normally require a bachelor's degree. The individual also has to have a degree or the equivalent in a field that relates to the job. That's kind of like the core requirements. And then there's company side requirements, which, would be a viable U.S. employer, employee-employee relationship, which has changed, and we're going to take a deep dive into. So that's sort of the basics on H-1Bs.
Yeah, my dad he was an immigration lawyer. He used to talk about the H-1B as a three-legged stool. And so you needed all three legs correct. So you didn't fall off your behind when you sat down. And so they were essentially, and you could divide it up into more legs or whatever, but he just basically said viable company, viable role, viable beneficiary. Those are the real.
Yeah, I think when you break it down, that's exactly what it is. That's correct. Yeah.
And so we've done a lot of work to help startups prove that they're viable companies. And I think we've come really far with that. Compared
I agree. Yeah.
where the industry was a decade ago. We've really pushed the bounds with USCIS to help them educate them as to like what a legitimate US employer is. And what do you think the minimum viable company is, Linda, that could sponsor an H-1B?
I
Some
mean,
examples.
yeah, I mean, we're pretty creative in the cases that we do. So they can be pre-revenue and that's fine. They can even have no employees and the H-1B can be their first employee. Usually
Or
there's
no
one,
investment.
right? Right. So I mean, I think it's just, it comes down to money sometimes. Like we want to be able to show because we have this prevailing wage requirement that is an obstacle sometimes. So we have to be able to show the company can essentially pay this prevailing wage for the worker. Um, and we can be a little bit creative. I know some startup co-founders say, or founders, I want to work part-time. My company can afford to pay me part-time. So let's move forward. And I can only get enough funding to cover sort of a part-time salary for the 3-year duration that we're requesting.
Yeah. Yeah. This really hit home to me when I was speaking at TechCrunch Disrupt this fall in September in San Francisco. But because the funding landscape has changed, it used to be like a year or two ago, we'd have situations of like, oh, Sophie, I only raised $10 million, but we have no product, no employees, and no revenue. Can we still get an H-1B? So like that got flagged for fraud, even though it was like a big VC, but it still got approved because it was legit. It was a real
Yeah.
company. It wasn't just some fraudulent immigration scheme. So we proved that. But because the market was like that with low interest rates and low inflation and the great resignation and just it was a completely different economic moment from the time being today. So we saw certain types of common company profiles, but now the pendulum is almost swung to the other side. We're seeing so many pre-fundraising startups that actually have revenue. They're like, well, we have 10,000 users on our generative AI platform for blah, 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 blah industry. And we just want to start playing around with our payment model. We want to sign up with Stripe. We want to start collecting payments, but we're all F1 students. We don't have work authorization. How do we do it? But we have 10,000 people and at least 1,000 of them are ready to pay us at least $5 a month immediately. Is that okay? Can we get an H-1B? We don't have VC funding. We want to wait and we want to scale and we want to have our pricing pinned down and our go-to-market before we talk to any investors because we want to control the terms. But actually that's like that situation has more in common with the traditional brick and mortar business that USCIS would be familiar with. Like, oh, you have a small company that makes money where you need to hire an employee with the money you are making from your product or service. There's no investors. Like that's very normal for what businesses used to be. So
Yeah.
just to assure everybody, that's totally fine.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. And then we see people bootstrap too instead of going funding. So it's really changing a lot. And the revenue example you gave, I just filed a case just like that, and they don't have any funding and it got approved, but we could show that there was like business activity.
Exactly. Minimum viable H-1B. I got somebody approved once, and this was like 8 years ago when I was doing this in my kitchen, but like no revenue, no investment, $10,000 in the bank. And USCIS literally gave us an RFE saying, how are you going to pay the prevailing wage? And we're like, well, here's the business plan. And here's a letter of intent from a customer, a potential customer. And they're like, well, okay, we'll approve it for a year. So we got it approved and it was valid for a year. And then we showed, oh, look, there's sales, there's traction, and we got it extended.
That's
It's
great.
totally fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot is possible. And I was just talking to a founder yesterday about how it's kind of like a Schrodinger's economy. Like if you're familiar with physics and quantum physics and the cat, it's like, is it there? Is it not there? I think that like whatever you want in this economy, you can have. Like if you want some crazy awful thing, great, there's evidence. If you want some like amazing thing with hidden opportunities that's like right for the picking, great. So we're helping a ton of businesses right now, which is very, very exciting. Okay, and I see all those questions coming in, so that's great. We will try to get to all of these. Okay, so this is another really important legal concept, Linda. So how much do you have to work on an H-1B?
You know, it's interesting, the regulations don't provide a minimum amount of hours. And I used to always kind of approach this much more cautiously, but over the past few years, like we have seen like the government be much more flexible. And you could do an H-1B for 5 hours, for 10 hours. You know, or you can do a range. And that's often what I recommend if someone wants to do part-time, 10 to 20 hours, so they have more flexibility.
Yeah, and there's no people are like, well, can I have two 40-hour-a-week jobs? I'm like, well, probably not. But or like, what's the minimum? We've seen consular processing get approved for 5 hour a week. And
Yeah.
the intention was they were going to get a second concurrent job after they arrived in the States. Like they literally got a visa for a 5 hour a week job. So I
Mhm.
think it has to pass the sanity sniff test of like, can you live off of this amount of money? What is this enough time to get your job done?
Mhm.
Are you working an insane amount? Are they going to worry that you're being held hostage by some crazy person who's doing this to you? So we want to make
Yeah.
sure, but there's no limit on the number of concurrent employer petitions you could have. So you could have three jobs, you could have three 5 hour a week jobs at a time. You could
Mhm.
have um one job for 20 or 25 hours a week. Under what situations would you need an amendment? Is there a way to set it up so that you could work, so that you could change your hours? Like if you only have a little bit of money now, so
Mhm.
you don't want to work that much, but later you want to increase your pay and the amount you're going to work once you hit some traction or funding
I
milestone, like
mean,
you have to
yeah,
get an amendment every time?
I would say when you go from part-time to full-time, you can create flexibility within that part-time. As I mentioned, you can put a range of hours.
Yeah.
But when we're filling out the application form, there's a separate box for full-time, and that's treated differently. So
Yeah.
my recommendation would be to file an H-1B amendment when you want to go full-time. I think it's a best practice.
Okay, okay, great. And then just in thinking, because I think a lot of aspiring founders have H-1Bs through the lottery, they're working in a big tech company, and maybe they have some project they've been working on, but they're like, okay, like new year, new you. It's time to go do this. How do I go create a company? I'm ready to quit my day job, and we'll talk about some of the considerations with that. But how do you figure out how much time you have remaining on your H-1B?
Yeah, I mean, so, when someone has a lot of H-1B history and they've traveled quite a bit, we try to map it out. I mean, technically, you have a 6-year timeline, and that includes all time spent in the US. So you can recapture and essentially buy back any time spent outside the US. So whenever we file a petition, we want to try to get the most amount of time. We want to try to get to that 3-year threshold if possible. And we can often do that by, drawing time that you've spent. Maybe you went to India for a month for the holidays.
Right.
That time can go back to you.
Yeah, in the pandemic, everybody was just stuck in one place. So we were either going to recapture 11 months or you used 11 months.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can do that. That's great. And it's typically just if you're new to the H-1B, it's typically 3-year maximum petition approval periods, usually up to 6 years initially. And then if you have an approved I-140, you can get, or other various exceptions, you can get extensions beyond the 6 years. So can be helpful. Do you ever have anybody willingly choose like, well, I have 3 years left, but I only want to do a 1-year H-1B this time? I guess you could. We don't typically see that, but you don't have to request the full available time. Most people
Yeah,
do. Right?
you certainly don't. I mean, I just think it's like a cost benefit analysis. You're going to spend all
Mhm.
that money in legal fees and government filing fees.
Yeah.
So I say go for the full amount of time, but when you depart the US, you're not using your H-1B time.
Yeah.
So you could still preserve it if you're
And the
worried.
company can always end the H-1B early if you get sent to the Swedish office or something, or I don't
Right,
know. Yeah.
right,
Okay.
exactly.
Great. Okay, so we use part-time and concurrent H-1Bs in different ways for founders, especially
Mhm.
early stage. You can either do a full-on transfer, leave your day job and just go full-time to your startup. You can leave your day job and go like 20 to 25 hours a week for your startup only. You could keep your day job and like add on 5 to 10 hours a week for your startup. That's risky from an IP perspective. We'll talk about that. You could have, 20 hours a week on your startup and 20 hours a week on your consulting company. So I think there's a lot of ways to do it. You just have to think about what you want and where your money's going to come from and how much you want to hustle and how much you want to do your corporate job. So definitely lots of
Yeah,
ways.
we definitely jump into that analysis and we walk through the options and, weigh the benefits and risks.
But if you want to become our client, the more clear you can get with yourself about your dream life before you talk to us, the more we can use our legal eagle minds to figure out a way to make it happen. I think what's hard for us is if we want to help somebody, but they're not willing to speak up about what they want because they're afraid of being disappointed or something. Like, we'll tell you no if it's not possible. Like, it breaks our hearts, but we want to at least know what the North Star is so that we can try to get you moving forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about what we've been leading up to, how to launch your startup while you're on H-1B. So this is a very tricky chicken and egg situation with a lot of considerations, and it has some parallels if you're like an F1 international student, maybe without work authorization, but it's a little bit particular. So let's say, Linda, I work for a big tech company full-time and I have one H-1B employer and I am dabbling in this project with my friends at night. What can I do?
I mean, you can do research, you can speak to investors, you can sort of put feelers out, and gather information. But actually selling, producing a product, you've got to be careful about productive work because
Yeah.
that's not permitted. You only are authorized to work for that H-1B employer or your primary employer.
I think of like a scientist with beakers in a laboratory. And if you're just like, oh, what happens if I mix this and I mix this? Oh my gosh, like I just figured out how to create gold with alchemy. And be like an accidental experiment, right? But if you're like, oh, I will, and this is where it gets tricky because most of our clients are not doing scientific research, they're coding, they're engineers. Um, I don't know. So it's like a very gray area. But if you're like, I will code this thing because I am, if you ever saw Pinky and the Brain, like we're gonna take over the world and this is my unicorn play and here's how we're gonna engineer it and here's the valuation and here's how we're gonna mastermind this. I would say that's very risky because you're doing productive services planning for future remuneration. So that's like what not to do. But if you're like, oh, I just like did this fun thing with my friends for fun, and now it turns out we created something that might be valuable, and now we're gonna shop it around to see if there's interest, like, that's
Yeah.
theoretically okay. It has to do with I think the interpretation of what is work really has to do with when you're doing the activity, what is the plan for future remuneration? So it's a lot about your intention.
Yeah.
I would also say, okay, so now we have and some of this is like what you can do on F1 or B1. It's like, poke around, research. Oh, you got into YC. Maybe you should get a visa before then. But a lot of people attend that as visitors, right? So you can meet with investors, you can negotiate contracts from your personal capacity, you can decide with who's going to be your co-founder, how much equity you're each going to have. You can go to startup conferences. You could also incorporate a company, but I would just say you shouldn't do both at the same time. Like if you just own an LLC that has your real estate portfolio and you're not managing it because you have some real estate management services company, that's fine. You can own a company. Likewise, you could own like an IP holding company that might become your startup one day. It's just if you've incorporated your startup and it has some valuable IP asset, then it would be much more easy to make an argument that any activities you're doing for market research or negotiating with investors, that those would be unauthorized work because your company has been set up. So sort of like, how long can we wait before you incorporate? Which
Yeah.
Which goes with startup founder advice, not to like prematurely optimize. It goes with like speculation on, oh, VCs are looking for companies that were recently incorporated. It goes with the whole IP strategy that we're going to be talking about in a minute.
Mhm.
So be very cautious about what you do. And clearly some things are absolutely unauthorized. So what are some things like that, Linda?
So I would say, you're actually actively managing the day-to-day operations of the
Yeah.
company. You're on LinkedIn, you're the CEO, you're working with customers, you're getting orders for products, that's productive work. So
Yeah.
that's something you've got to be really careful of. And, developing a prototype, but actually trying to sell your product, getting contracts, I think that's when you've kind of crossed the line when you don't have the work authorization.
And then certainly payroll, like do not put yourself on Gusto and start getting W-2 income. That is a clear no.
Yeah, right, right. Because you've got the IRS. I mean, it's just something you can't undo.
Yep.
Um, so be
Yeah.
really cautious and then obviously maintain your status. So if you're coming in on a B1, B2, you want to make sure you track that expiration date, you depart before it expires, or if you come in on ESTA, whatever
Yeah.
status you're in, it's just really important to maintain that status.
And unlike an O1 where we can set it up with an itinerary of services for an agent so that you're allowed to have multiple jobs.
Mhm.
I know H-1Bs could theoretically be sponsored by agents if it's on behalf of a foreign company, but they don't allow itineraries. I've never seen that in practice. So likely your H-1B is only to do a one particular job. So anything else you want to do besides that is going to need another visa, like an O1 or a concurrent H-1B or some amendment that allows you to consult for both. So you
Mhm.
want to be really, really careful because oh, what was that? There's some thing I read it on Twitter at midnight a couple days ago, and it was like startup founders kill risk, and it was like this thing about like proactively going after every single risk to the company and the idea and just annihilating it. And so, you don't want your own status to be one of the risks to the existence of this company. And the more you believe in your startup, the more critical all these things are to do right the first time. But you have limited time, resources, budget, so you just want to do the one thing that makes everything else easier or unnecessary. All right, so that leads us to when to incorporate. So first of all, if somebody is setting up a company and they're going to do an H-1B for one of the founders or an early stage employee, what are the typical things that the company will need before we can file that come from the incorporation process?
Yeah, I mean, so they definitely need to have an FEIN, so they'll need to apply for that. And then they'll have to have the articles of incorporation. We recommend a US bank account. If there's any kind of state registration or state business license, that's important. The other kind of important thing, I think, is to try to get some kind of business address. USCIS loves to Google the address and say, this is a
So they'll know
residential
if it's a UPS store or a
address.
WeWork hot desk.
Yeah, or I mean, they're generally okay with the co-working space, but the residential address is going to be a red flag for them. So we've got to be cautious about that. Or we advise clients to have rented some kind of space.
Yeah, and sometimes founders use their home address if they're doing like Stripe Atlas or Clerky Incorporation in the middle of the night or something. It would be nice if you had a work address first before you incorporated, and then that's a whole chicken and egg. Like, how do I, because I recently created like an IP holding company for my Ask Sophie book, and I needed an address, and it needed to be a physical address and not a PO box because I needed to be able to like receive service and process there. And so I went to a Regis and I was like, how do people do this? And I'm like, well, you get the office in your personal name, you have the paperwork for your new company, come here, you use this address, we realize that you're gonna own this company, and then you go on your online profile and update your profile so that your business has your lease here instead of you personally. Like,
Mhm.
oh, it's that easy. Okay, great. Money talks, fine. Like, give me the address. So there's different ways to do it, but
Yeah.
yeah, because like once somebody was like, well, we used that person's home address for the incorporation, and then we had this co-working space, but then we got this UPS store mailbox for our mail. So they had like 3 or 4 addresses by the time we file. It was really
Yeah.
confusing. Yeah.
And you know, some people will update these things with the new worksite address too, which is helpful because USCIS will go into the Vibe database and look the company up.
Yes. So that's another thing, Dun and Bradstreet, DNB, it's like this business registration database that the government uses. And so you can just go in and create a profile for your business and have it before we file the H-1B, and it helps.
Yes.
They'll look it up. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like 125 to get a DUNS profile, but it's money well spent.
Yeah. Yeah. It can save you an RFE and many weeks and a lot of headache and heartache. Yeah, and so then the question comes up of when should we incorporate? So what's the very last possible date to incorporate if we're doing an H-1B transfer?
I mean, for us to really launch the case, we want to know that there's an employer. I mean, in rare circumstances, you know, it might be like, I'm incorporating later this week, but I'm ready to start collecting docs. Ideally, when you come to us, we want you to have that company incorporated.
Yeah.
That's really a best practice.
It's best too, because then your company can hire us as the company's law firm instead of you individually.
Right.
Yeah, that's a best practice. But at a minimum, we need that FEIN number to get your labor condition application to be able to file your H-1B. So as early as you can get it, once you've committed to doing an H-1B for somebody, the better. And once again, some people do it way in advance, and that might have downsides. So, and we're immigration lawyers. We're not corporate attorneys, employment attorneys, or intellectual property attorneys. And all these things raise considerations in those areas as well. So to that end, we are not IP lawyers. However, we have heard from some of our clients and some practitioners in the space that some of these things are helpful to consider, especially if you're working in a big tech company. So Linda, can you just give us a brief overview of, let's say you have a day job in big tech as a software developer, and you're thinking of starting your own startup and transferring your H-1B. What are you allowed to do for your project?
Yeah, I mean, I think there has to be a really clear separation because especially if you work for a large company, you don't want it ever to appear that you've taken any intellectual property or trade secrets from that employer. So you want to make sure that you don't have any sort of appearance of taking information from that company, sending yourself emails, sharing work products. So you really have to kind of have a clear separation between the two companies, and you should only be taking what you have in your head. I know that sounds kind of silly, but you know, that's a good way to think about it.
Don't download a bunch of code before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And also use your own time, use your own resources. So like, don't use your work laptop to create your side project. Do it at night on your home internet or in a coffee shop, but on your personal or your company laptop, for example.
Right.
Because once again, the more serious you are about building a startup and the more valuable you believe it's going to be, the more you want to take these things that could be existential risks to the viability of your business into consideration at the early stages. So like owning your own intellectual property, that's a critical asset of this future company. So you really want to make sure you ensure you have it. And you know, most American founders who I know who leave big tech or a prior startup that exited to start their next thing, they might just be like on sabbatical for 6 months before you hear anything from them. They're not on social media. You don't know where they are. Their LinkedIn is vague. They're clearly not working for the old company anymore. Completely ended all of that. You know, and then they tweet something over the weekend that there's this amazing new thing that went viral. But you don't know what happened in between. So they really have that clean break that they have laid out. But it's a little different if you're an immigrant and you're on a non-immigrant status. So Linda, how does the grace period play into this for folks?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a way to basically stay in the US in H or O, whatever status you're in for an additional 60 days beyond your termination date. So if you give notice at a company, you have your final date, you have 60 days to stay in the US or change to another status or file another H-1B. So that's like a nice buffer between jobs sometimes too, for people that are looking to start their own company.
And the thing I'm so happy that we got clarified like a year ago in all the layoffs was it doesn't matter if you're fired or if you quit or if you're laid off. Like if you ended and your H-1B wasn't done yet, you get a 60-day grace period or any of these visa types. So
yeah.
so you could theoretically have a project, talk to co-founders, even have a community or an interest list, and give your notice and then leave, and then you're on the 60-day grace period, and then maybe your American co-founder is testing payments after you incorporate, and then we're doing the H-1B for you within the 60 days so that you can go on as CEO or CTO or something. So we want to, it's like, we want to be very careful because I just made a ton of assumptions that don't hold for most companies. It's super individualized. And it matters if you have a spouse or travel plans or what
Right.
role in the company you're going to do, or when you're going to get funding or how or traction. So we want to be very, very careful. And with all these projects, just once again, be very careful that this could all be considered unauthorized work under immigration law. So be careful. Talk to us early, often.
Yeah, and do a consultation. I mean, this is exactly what we do, so we can
Yeah.
help discuss these issues with you.
Yeah, and we have two modes essentially. If it's super clear to us that you're like ready to hire us and you have a company that has money and you want to pay us to do a case, we'll often be able to just offer you some time complimentary. But we also have options to pay for legal advice with one of our attorneys. So if you just know you're super early stage, but you want to talk to a lawyer individually, you can sign up for a paid legal advice consultation with us as well. Okay. So let's talk about this really exciting new thing, which I'm thrilled about. And we may continue to see some updates on this as the new H-1B guidance continues to roll out, but I feel pretty confident that this is already law. And there's been some inconsistencies with the administration, but they seem to be aligned now around this. So what is the employer-employee relationship prong of an H-1B, Linda?
Yeah, I mean, an H-1B can't be self-employed, a worker, right? So, they have to be employed as an employee of the company, and you have to show that the company is really a separate entity from that individual. And in years past, we would go to great lengths to show that, arm's length distance between the employee and the company, articles of incorporation, the 3-member board,
We would tell founders, give up your shares, sell them to somebody else, have less than 50% in some
Yeah.
cases. Create two classes of stock, one that can vote, one that can't.
Right.
Get rid of your control.
Yeah.
Bring in a random American. Bring in an American you trust. But I've seen really crazy things come out of that. Like, even in a great situation where somebody ended up with like an EB1, they made tremendous sacrifices for that initial startup, and it didn't grow the way it could have simply because they had to give up too much control many years ago to somebody else. And so it couldn't grow in their image. So, now you can go on to other startups and things, but I think more and more, to the extent founders can hold on to equity and control at the early stages, that's a really, really valuable gift. So the administration has been chatting about this for years, but we've seen some really strong forward movement. So 6 months ago, they updated their website and they said, look, you don't have to give up your shares. You don't need a 3-member board to prove employer-employee relationship. We're getting rid of common law principles. We're just relying on corporate law. So like, you just got to work there. You need an offer letter. You need to be on payroll. We got to get the LCA. And we saw that reiterated a few weeks ago in the H-1B modernization rule, for which comments are due December 22nd, in case you're in favor or opposed. So, okay, so let's examine this. So let's say we have an aspiring founder who's on H-1B, who has time left, and they want to create a startup. They want to be the CEO, and maybe they want 80% equity.
Mhm.
How is it possible for this person to potentially get an H-1B approved?
I mean, I think today they have a very strong likelihood of getting it approved based
Yeah.
on the new guidance. You know,
That's
the regulation's not codified, but it basically says that it already reiterates what the current guidance is. So, yeah.
And you could have two founders that are 50-50. One is CEO, one is CTO. Both could be immigrants on H-1Bs. The CEO could easily sign for the CTO. We probably want to figure out somebody else to sign for the CEO, but there's all sorts of fractional HR organizations or maybe other board members or other people with signatory authority in the companies who we could rely on. So I think this is revolutionary and disruptive. And I'm so excited about this because I've just seen so many people over the years be like, well, I want to be the CEO, but now I have to give up all my equity and go to a job I don't want in a company that isn't in my vision, but I really want to be a founder and I need an EB1. So I think this is completely the pathway for a lot of people. So I'm so glad we have great attendance on this webinar. So I really hope this inspires people.
Yeah, it's an amazing shift to see happen, you
Yeah.
know, and so I'm really excited about doing more of these cases
Ah,
um, for majority owners.
great. Okay, let's talk briefly about the lottery and transfers and how people can start with us, and then let's get into all these questions. So, there's so many considerations when we start a case. This is some of the stuff that we will counsel you about when you reach out to us. We'll figure out what rule you want. We'll make sure we have the LCA and the public access folder, and we'll do the filing, and we'll help you decide if you need premium processing and what your start date should be and how much you want to work and what the wages that you're working with, and we'll tell you all the documents, and we can expedite if you want. So there's like a lot. In general, if you're currently in a valid H-1B status, that will make your start date more rapidly accessible. In general, it takes us 6 weeks to prepare and file an H-1B from start to finish, and the government takes 15 days with premium processing. We do have expedite options available, and depending on how early stage your company is, often we can file in 3 to 4 weeks with those expedite options if you're ready to go and give us all your documents. And then just in terms of budget for this, because the company has to pay, with premium processing for an early stage startup, your filing fees to USCIS are going to be about $4,000. Typically for an early stage company or founder, our legal fee is about $6,000. So you're looking at about $10,000. And then for a few thousand more, we can expedite as well. And then we're just your immigration partner for your company. So as you grow and as you consider hiring more employees, we can help you vet their background and make sure they're eligible to help you decide if you want to extend an offer. And we do all of that for free. So we want to be your partner for the long term. We also have the lottery coming up. So this is like also interesting. Maybe there's people on this webinar who are international students on F1. Maybe they're about to graduate or they're on regular OPT, or maybe some of you are in other countries and you don't have an H-1B yet. So it is that time of year where you can get new H-1Bs, and all of this stuff about founder, beneficiary owner H-1Bs that we've been talking about, where like you can be the CEO and have majority equity, those arguments will still stand in the H-1B lottery. So let's say you're in Thailand right now or something, and you want to come to San Francisco to start your company next year, and or you've already incorporated it and it has some revenue, but you want to move here and you're not qualified for an O visa yet. The startup could put the CEO who's in Thailand into the lottery and try to get a new H-1B. So we could do that. We can also get new H-1Bs without the lottery through many ways, but one of them that we like is a 5-hour-a-week nonprofit gig where you help U.S. international students and U.S. students in college with STEM project-based learning. So we have lots of options for you. if you're looking at the H-1B lottery for this year, or even to put in potential employees, like your friends from back home who would like to come be a software engineer in your company here. They don't have to move to Silicon Valley. They can live in Austin, Texas, or Idaho, or Miami. Anyway, this time is now. We've just started accepting cases. If you think you want to put anybody in the lottery, please contact us like this week or next week. We're going to close for a week in the holidays. And we just want to make sure that we have enough capacity to help everybody this year who's going to be signing up. But the USCIS is trying to change the lottery in time for this year to help small businesses in the United States by giving each beneficiary a single chance at being selected. So there's no longer an incentive to get multiple offers to game the system. So if you're going to put somebody in the lottery, likely they're actually going to want to start working for you after this year, and hopefully they'll have a higher chance. Okay, we also help with green cards. We can help founders self-petition green cards. We like to avoid the perm process because it saves a year and a half. And then if you have too much equity, you could get audited. So we typically do EB-1As if people were born in India or China, or EB-2 NIWs for people born in the rest of the world. EB-2 NIW has a bit of a backlog right now for the first time. EB-1A just like popped forward like 20 months or something for people from India. So that's really exciting. There's also an incentive to like get a priority date sooner rather than later if you're like an international student or early in your H and no company has done a perm for you yet. So we do have a lot of founders getting an EB-2 NIW approved, even though they're from India or China. And then they plan to use that priority date in the EB-1A category later. We also do a lot of O1s. So if you don't want to pay the prevailing wage, or you need to have multiple income streams, or you're trying to gun for an EB-1 or something, we might recommend an O1A. So that's another tool. You only need 3 out of these 8 categories, and we'll help guide you through the whole thing. Okay, now we're going to be able to get to all these amazing questions that I see in the chat window. So we will go through them. And actually, while we do that, I'll just put our consultation link here, and the book is available. And we would love to help you. So let's just start from the beginning, Linda. Our first question is, somebody's interested in doing a concurrent cap exempt H-1B and a non-cap exempt H-1B, so a cap subject H-1B. They're asking, can I first find a cap exempt company and get the cap exempt H-1B? Then when I get to the US on the cap exempt H-1B, look for a full-time job at a non-cap exempt company, like a FANG, for example, and apply for the usual non-cap exempt H-1B with FANG. Yeah, I think they could, but I don't think it's the usual route we see most of our clients take. So if you wanted to do that, you could get like a part-time teaching assistant job at a university. Maybe they would sponsor you for a 10 to 15 hour a week H-1B to come here, but I don't know if that would be worth their time unless you're an alum. What most of our clients do is they find their job at their tech startup, and then the company, the private cap subject company that wants to employ them, we end up having that company nominate them to Open Avenues Foundation, where they get considered for the Global Talent Fellowship and a cap exempt 5-hour a week H-1B. But yeah, I mean, this could work. It'd be great if you could pull it off, but I think the problem would be finding that initial cap exempt role.
And then you have to maintain 2 jobs. I mean, I think that's the other important point, is you can't, just because you get that second H, you still have to work in that first cap.
Yeah, you have to do both the whole time for them to remain valid.
Yeah.
All right. Anonymous is launching a startup on an H-1B visa focused on freelancing from sites like Upwork and Fiverr. They need to understand how a co-founder can set a variable commission-based salary, and what are the financial necessities for registering this lean freelance-based startup. So, I mean, I guess it's I don't know if it's like a venture backable startup in the Silicon Valley sense, but it sounds like a new consulting business doing this freelance work. So Linda, I think the specific question is, how does variable comp work with prevailing wage for H-1Bs?
Yeah, unfortunately, when we look at the prevailing wage, the government is actually looking at the wage you're getting paid. They don't, any kind of compensation that's a bonus, not guaranteed, that can't be counted towards the prevailing wage. So you could do something part-time, you get paid an hourly rate, and then on top of that, you could get your bonus compensation tacked on.
Or you could live somewhere cheap, like in the Midwest, and then
Mhm.
you could give the person equity or bonuses on top of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, I think we covered this. Can I transfer my H-1B visa to my own recently founded company? The answer is yes. What are the caveats? You need enough money to pay the prevailing wage and you need somebody else to sign the documents, but I think we can handle both of those. And of course, we need to show it's a valid role. We need to show it's professional. We need to show you have the right background. So it's like all the normal H-1B stuff, but you can do this now in general. The H-1B, the employer-employee relationship change. Yeah, like they updated their website about this last spring. So probably like 2 years ago, we had some issues where they weren't enforcing this consistently, but I think there's been a broad directional shift at USCIS, and we have now this guidance to point and say, like, this is how you guys need to adjudicate these. So I think it's solid now. Somebody's on an H-1B, they have an approved I-140 in the EB2 category. They want to be a founder and it's their first time and they don't have any artifacts yet, that they haven't built up their portfolio of accomplishments in order to get an O1 or an EB1. So they're interested in a green card, and I did put on that slide that there's the EB1C green card. Can you explain what the EB1C green card is?
Sure. So this is the first employment preference category type green card pathway, but it's for individuals that have worked abroad for a foreign entity in a managerial or executive position for at least a year, and now they're being sought to work in the US full time for a related company, a related US company. So that's how you qualify for that
So you need
category.
to have 2 companies and you have to go work from the foreign one for a year. But even assuming you did that, you would still need a team there and revenue and business. You can't just close it and move to the US and qualify for this. So this would
Right.
make more sense if you had like an Israeli or Australian or Japanese startup that was doing a US market expansion, for example, but there's no perm.
Mhm.
But it's not a self-petition. So if the company dies, your green card might die with it. So in that case, an EB1A or an EB2 NIW might still be better for you. But we have people who are students who have 0 work authorization, do a bunch of free stuff to get qualified for an O1A, and it doesn't involve unauthorized work. So it is definitely possible to explore that. And we have a lot of webinars on that as well. Okay, somebody else has their spouse is on an H-1B, and so they have a H-4 dependent status and a work permit, but they're concerned about, like, what if my spouse gets laid off? It would be better if we each had our own separate H-1B.
Mhm.
So let's just say this is like the person has work authorization to set up their startup, and then they're going to need a new H-1B for the first time. What would their process be in a nutshell, given the time of year we're at?
Yeah, so I mean, this is someone that's never had an H-1B, Sophie? Yeah.
Let's just assume.
Okay.
Take
Yeah, I
argument.
mean, so you've got the lottery. So right now, as Sophie mentioned, we're accepting new registrations. So we would put you into the lottery. We'd collect all your documents and evidence now. And then come March, there would be a USCIS portal registration process. We would get results of the selection by April 1. And if you're selected, then you have 90 days to file a CAP petition, which would have a start date of October 1, 2024.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and we can pivot from an EAD to an H-1B pretty much anytime. So
Yeah,
that's great
definitely.
that you have that foundation. That'll make the setup easier. Have we seen people with search funds get an H-1B? No, we just started doing search fund cases, but they've all been in the world of O1s and green cards. Super common with Stanford GSB business students or Harvard Business School students. Sometimes what I've noticed is that the company The founder doesn't want to take the investor's money to start the company until they've figured out their immigration status, since it's such a personal relationship and these people are relying on you a lot. But let's just assume the company exists, you're going to be the CEO and it's been funded. Just like with these other situations, it's definitely possible to get an H-1B for that CEO. Somebody else is working at an academic institution, and so they're on a cap exempt H-1B, and so they're asking about if they just want to go work for a startup as their only job, would they need to go through the H-1B lottery?
They would, yeah. The only way they could avoid that was be working concurrently for the cap exempt employer and then another employer. But yes, they need to get a new lottery number.
Yeah, so if you're willing to keep working for the academic institution, maybe decrease the number of hours you work every week. If they're okay with you doing a startup on the side, that would be a great benefit, because then the startup could get a second concurrent H-1B that's not subject to the lottery either. But if the academic institution demands full-time work, then it might not be practical. So you might want to just go through the lottery or get an O1. Do companies need to show funds for the prevailing wage for all 3 years? No. No, this is one of those art things about law. It's like the art of persuasion. If you hire us, we are lawyers who are good at telling a story of why the business is legitimate and how your salary will be paid and covered. And if you have a business plan, if you have a go-to-market strategy, if you might get investors at some point, all of these, if you have traction, all of these are tools we can use to tell the story of how that prevailing wage is going to be paid. But you do not need 3 years of runway locked in a bank account in order to get an H-1B. Totally fine without it. You could simply be a company that makes money every month. Fancy that. Okay. When you file an amendment, Linda, does it have to go through the lottery system again?
No. So if it's a cap subject H-1B, once the amendments file for any kind of material change, you can start working under those new terms and conditions, but you don't have to go through the lottery again.
If you have majority shares, do you need to restructure? The answer is no. You can still get an H-1B now with majority shares. That's the recent update we're super excited to talk about. And that goes to another question of, can I sponsor myself in my own company? The answer now is yes. If you're really going to work there, go on payroll, have an offer letter, meet the prevailing wage, have the specialty occupation, you can do that now. Let's say I'm working at Google full-time as a software engineer. Can I incorporate and work part-time on my startup for 20 hours? Okay, so this is the disconnect between immigration law and IP law. For immigration law, this is perfectly acceptable. I think Google has some startup screening committee you have to go through, tell them your ideas. They have to decide if they want to lay claim to it and if they're okay with you working on it. And then you just have to be super cautious about your intellectual property. So if you're working, full time at your friend's IT consulting company and they're happy for you about your startup, I would say that's a very different situation than working at a large corporation that has strict IP confidentiality rules and also has their fingers in so many different types of technologies that even if you have a dog grooming platform, maybe Google is going to get into that one day. We don't know. So you want to be super careful. And we can recommend IP attorneys if you need a consultation. Okay. Can a music or film production startup sponsor somebody for an H-1B whose other job is, let's just say, a software engineer?
I mean, I think it's going to depend on the offered job, because it does have to relate to their education experience. We have this specialty occupation test for the H-1B, so we need to get information.
Yeah, happy to consult with you about that. But there's probably a lot of jobs in a film or music production company that could relate to your skill set and your studies, especially if you're the founder, you know how to do things that help that company. Okay, if somebody hasn't transferred their own H-1B yet and they own a company and they're not working there yet, but they want that company to do business and have freelancers, can that person organize that the freelancers are going to do the projects for the company? I think maybe.
Yeah, I think we have to know a little bit more,
Yeah.
but I do think that's could be feasible.
Um, can a mechanical engineer have a software startup?
Yes, they can.
If your I-140 is pending beyond 180 days, do you get a 6-month grace period? No. It's still 60 days, but
I think
your
it's
your priority date will stick at that point.
mhm.
And then if your I-485 has been pending for 180 days, you have portability. So that's another thing. So, I don't know. Talk to us if you need help with that. Okay, I think we're gonna take 2 more and then we're gonna wrap up. And we got through half the questions, so that's pretty good. Everybody else, please contact us. We'll be happy to answer these for you through consultation. Ooh, H-1B contractors. The employer is running payroll, but the location is the same, but the contracting project has ended. Oof.
It depends on how the H-1B is structured, really. It's, because it could be like an end client situation, but there could be multiple end clients. So, material changes in employment are like a work site outside of the commuting area,
Yeah.
salary changes below the prevailing wage, or their hours change. Those are the job duties change. So those are the things we would look at. So we'd really have to take a deeper dive.
And we just have to talk to your employer because like we're not going to
Absolutely.
know that's just talking to you, but their
Right.
immigration lawyer should handle it, or we can take a second look. Okay. And we are going to be having a pop-up quick survey come up when we end the Zoom webinar. We would really love it if you complete that. So thank you so much in advance. Okay, and then last question. Does the H-1B filed by your startup need to be approved within the 60-day grace period, or does it just need to be filed within that grace period?
Oh, I love easy questions. Filed.
Yay! Okay, that was the most concise answer. Thank you so much, Linda. That concludes today's webinar, everybody. Thank you so much for attending. We would love to help you. If you need somebody in the lottery, please tell us now. If you want to get started on your startup and your H-1B transfer for the new year, please contact us now. We'd love to help. Thank you so much for listening, all the great questions, your continued attention, your support, and have a wonderful day and happy holidays.
Bye, everyone. Happy holidays. Bye.
Bye.